behind the reinforced viewport, the world of Obsidian 4 was a bruise of purple and black. It was a corpse of a planet, holding its breath for centuries while the terraforming engines of Aegis Hub hummed their mournful, sterile song. Within the command deck, the air tasted of recycled ozone and old math. Kaelin adjusted her thermal cloak, pulling the heavy silver-lined fabric tighter around her shoulders to ward off the artificial chill of the station. The cloak was a barrier, a professional distance made of weave and insulation, separating her from the cold reality of a world that refused to wake up. Her console flickered with a rhythmic pulse of amber data. She didn't need to look at the scrolling lines of Aurelian logic to know the outcome. The atmosphere was too thin, the core too stagnant, and the orbital heaters were failing. She had run the simulations 10,000 times. Each result was a flat line, a mathematical funeral. Logic dictated that Obsidian 4 would never see a sunrise that wasn't filtered through a haze of toxic dust. 0%. The computer never lied. It was a comfort, in a way, to exist in a universe governed by predictable decline. Kaelin tapped a final sequence into the terminal, her fingers moving with the efficiency of a machine. She was an observer of the inevitable, a chronicler of a quiet death. A heavy, rhythmic thudding. The sound vibrated through the deck plates, disrupting the hum of the air scrubbers. Kaelin's head snapped toward the primary airlock. The security lockouts should have been impenetrable, a sequence of biolocks that only an Aurelian officer could bypass. Instead, the heavy doors groaned, the silicate fiber seals shrieking as they were forced aside by something far more primal than a digital key. Have you ever wondered if the universe has a sense of humor, or if it just likes to watch us struggle against the inevitable? The story of Obsidian 4 is far from over, and you won't want to miss the moment the logic breaks. Join us as we uncover what happens when a dead world finally decides to fight back. Vance stepped onto the pristine deck, tracking thick, rust-colored mud across the polished floor. He was a Terran contractor, a species Kaelin found exhausting in their refusal to acknowledge the laws of thermodynamics. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life arguing with gravity and winning through sheer stubbornness. His gear was scorched, his breathing heavy, and he carried a containment canister that pulsed with a violent, bioluminescent green light. Kaelin's eyes fixed on the mud. It was an inefficiency, a disruption of the hub's sanitized order. She stood, the edges of her thermal cloak brushing against the console as she faced him. She reminded him that the deck was a level 6 clean zone and that his presence was a direct violation of protocol. She spoke of biosafety and the 0% probability of his mission's success. Vance didn't listen. He never did. He moved toward the main nutrient reactor column, his movements jagged and full of a heat that made Kaelin's skin prickle even beneath her cloak. He held up the canister. Within the glass, the Leviathan core shifted like a trapped storm. It was a biological super battery, a concentrated mass of radiosynthetic potential that shouldn't have existed. Kaelin warned him that the reactor wasn't designed for that kind of raw energy. She told him it would be a disaster, a high-energy disruption that the station's delicate systems could not absorb. Vance smiled, a flash of white teeth against a face smeared with grease. He told her that some systems required a punch in the teeth to truly begin. With a roar of effort, he jammed the core into the reactor's intake. The connection was crude, a violent marriage of Terran desperation and Aurelian engineering. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, the reactor began to scream. A wet, rhythmic pulsing began to drown out the emergency sirens. The Leviathan core didn't just power the reactor, it consumed it, rewriting the station's inorganic DNA into something frantic and verdant. Thick emerald vines erupted from the shattered column, their surfaces slick with a bioluminescent resin that smelled of crushed mint and ozone. Within minutes, the sterile silver of the command deck was choked by a predatory garden. The internal temperature climbed, the life support systems struggling against a sudden humid heat that turned the air into a thick soup. Kaelin felt the sweat slicking her skin, the heat radiating off the central column like a dying star. The hub was dying, but the room was coming alive. Kaylin's thermal cloak, once her silver-lined shield against the void, now felt like a leaden weight. It was a suffocating reminder of the logic that had failed her. She fumbled with the clasp, her fingers shaking as the station's power fluctuated. Vance was already ahead of her, his heavy environmental suit half unzipped as he wrestled with a silicate fiber vine that had coiled around the primary blast doors. The plant was aggressive, sensing the heat of their bodies, its tendrils seeking the moisture of their breath. The pheromones, Kaylin gasped, her voice thick. The core is releasing a high-energy chemical cocktail. It's forcing a biological synergy to accelerate its own expansion. It's using us, Vance. Vance didn't look back. His muscles corded as he shoved his shoulder against the 2-ton manual lever. He told her that nature didn't care about their protocols. It only cared about the impact, the violent spark that started the fire. He yelled for her to help him, his voice a raw command that cut through her internal calculations. Kaylin stripped the cloak away, letting the expensive fabric fall into the encroaching moss. She moved to the console, her skin meeting his as they gripped the manual override together. The contact was an electric shock, a messy human variable that no Aurelian simulation could have predicted. The vines were screaming now, a high-pitched vibration that rattled the deck plates. Beneath their hands, the console groaned under the pressure of the growth. They were trapped in a furnace of their own making, a jungle station hurtling through a dead system. They had to blow the bolts. It was the only way to vent the mass before it consumed the hub's structural integrity entirely. In the narrow crawlspace behind the terminal, the heat was absolute. Vance used his raw physical strength to tear through the final layer of fibrous growth, his knuckles bleeding as he reached for the manual bypass. Kaylin tracked the pressure levels, her mind finally abandoning the 0% probability for the 1% chance of survival. She signaled the countdown. Vance and Kaylin slammed their hands onto the console together as the explosive bolts detonate, venting the screaming mass of the Leviathan vine into the vacuum of space. Space swallowed the green fire. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by their ragged breathing. Through the viewport, they watched the emerald mass tumble toward the gravity well of Obsidian 4. It didn't burn up in the atmosphere. Instead, it hit like a seed, the impact energy of the Leviathan core blooming across the purple crust. A ripple of green began to spread, a slow, unstoppable wave of life claiming the bruise-colored rock. 6 months later, the High Arbiter's shuttle found them not in a command deck, but in a sprawling, inefficient canopy of leaves. The station had been hollowed out, a skeleton supporting a thriving colony of life. Kaylin sat on the edge of the cargo bay, a rough thermal blanket shared between her and Vance to ward off the cooling evening air of a world that was finally breathing. Thorne looked at the flourishing chaos with a gaze full of dread, asking if she knew what she had unleashed on the sector. "I know it's not logical," Kaylin said, watching a new sun set over a forest that shouldn't exist. "But for the first time, the math finally feels right." If you're wondering what other worlds are waiting to be woken up by a bit of human chaos, our next journey is already in sight. We'll be heading to the gravity wells of the Outer Rim tomorrow.